We work hard to be good men, but life is complex. We guess our way to becoming the men we want to be, but then sometimes we discover the map we're working with was incomplete. So, welcome to an hour of conversation and the launch of a new men's resource. And it's going to be some kind of wonderful. I'm so glad you're here. My name is Dave Kelly. So, if I think of me, my own life has been a journey to getting here, and the road has its smooth parts, beautiful pavement, bus full of friends, everyone's laughing, and there's definitely been some more rough terrain where I feel like I'm just by myself trying to find my own way. And now some of those times I was lucky enough to think about reaching out. So I've been through counseling, I've been part of men's groups, but one of the gaps was a great online resource, and that all changes today. So I want to do that and thank all the people involved in what we're about to tell you about. And there's some sponsors that helped us out. We want to thank the Calgary Foundation for their support for the development of the Men and Project. Thanks so much. We want to thank the Government of Alberta for their support and funding of the capacity building and further partnership development that's going to expand the capacity of Men and to reach more men provincially. We also want to thank you. A special thank you to the Blue Rock Project, Next Gen Men, the community advisory groups, and the staff, board of directors, and volunteers at the Calgary Women's Emergency Shelter. Great partners for this project that we hope blows you away. So, to recognize the land we are on, we have an acknowledgement from our friends at the Calgary Foundation.
We honor our ancestors by acknowledging Treaty 7 territory. We acknowledge the Treaty 7 nations, the Piikani First Nation, the Siksika First Nation, the Kainai First Nation, the Stoney Nakoda First Nations, and the Tsuut'ina First Nation. We acknowledge the ancestral territory of the Siksikaitsitapi, the Blackfoot Confederacy, and the home of Métis Region number 3.
Now I get to introduce you to somebody who I believe had a full 14-hour sleep every night this week, getting ready for for this morning. Kim Roos, let me tell you a bit about Kim. Kim Roos is the CEO of the Calgary Women's Emergency Shelter. She's a leader and innovator in programs, services, and organizational operations focused on addressing our community's complex social problems. Kim, you're here. You made it. How are you feeling?
I'm exhausted but excited. And thanks so much for doing this.
Oh, this is exciting, and it is. And I know, boy, you have been working to the finish line, and today's not even a finish line, but it's a stage, and the amount of work you and your team have done. So let me start a question for you. I know that the Calgary Women's Emergency Shelter has worked with men since the early 1990s. This isn't new for you, and I know that the outcomes in your men's counseling programs were positive. So then talk a little bit about how Men and came to be.
Sure. So about 6 years ago, we started to dig in a bit deeper with a research process to look at how we could engage men even better.
Mhm.
And so we worked with Dr. Jeff St. John and some other partners to help us learn more about how to mainstream the conversation about men seeking help and make it so that social responses were more positive and that we weren't discouraging men from seeking help with how we were positioning our services in the sector.
And I think that's a great point, that discouraging men is the piece of this, and you didn't even know potentially what discouraging was or what would be discouraging. What did some of the research tell you?
Well, we learned that that men actually look online first for help before they ever talk to friends or family or before they reach out to a professional service. We learned that that men can feel vulnerable and seeking help is a challenge for them. And they also, when they are talking about the kinds of help that they're looking for, the language that they're using does not typically line up with the language that services are using. So, for example, we might position ourselves as trying to help build healthy relationships. Often men think that they do have healthy relationships. And so that's not the search term that they use, and that's not how they go into looking for help.
Ah, and I would guess there's a timing issue in there too, that it would be easy to think men don't look for help until their life is completely out of control, and then they do. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think that we know that they look early online, and if they
Hmm.
don't find anything, then they actually don't reach out further. And so then things get worse and worse and worse until finally things are falling apart, as you say, and then that's when they reach out to more intense services.
And that's why you've been working so hard to get us
That's
to
right.
today, right? This is the day.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, it's so good. And I mentioned earlier how there's a lot of people involved and a lot of partnerships involved.
Mhm.
Talk a little bit about how important government partnerships are.
Well, I think all the partnerships are super important. Calgary Foundation has been amazing. The government of Alberta, their support in taking this project further is wonderful. We work with some really great partners like Next Gen Men, the Blue Rock Project, Calgary Counseling Center is here today. And also, I want to mention that so much of the work at the Calgary Women's Emergency Shelter is based on the work of Dr. Alan Wade, Dr. Shelley Bona, and I want to do a shout out to Jill Weaver Dunlop, who's our Director of Client Services, and the men's team, and just the amazing staff, because this is really coming out of their work.
Isn't it great? I mean, it must be like this is the birth of the biggest child you ever had.
It kind of feels like that this week. Yes,
Good.
it does.
Well, you know what, though? It is making a difference. And those of you watching, you're going to get to see some of this in just a bit. So thank you so much. And now I want to also get our Minister of Community and Social Services, Minister Jason Luan, was going to be here, couldn't, but still sent us a message. Here it
Hello,
is.
everyone, and welcome to the launch of Man and Project. I am Community Social Services Minister Jason Luan. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this very unique event, which is dedicated for supporting men's emotional and mental well-being, to create a non-violent, caring, and equitable future for themselves and for their children. I wish I could be here in person to celebrate this with you, but let me tell you this, today's event is another effort that we continue to emphasize nationally and internationally on the importance of engaging men and boys in addressing violence against women. Community and Social Services is leading the development of a provincial primary prevention framework and action plan that aims to prevent gender-based violence by scaling up protective factors and reducing risk factors. Therefore, in addition to 2.5 million funding to support this emergency shelter for women, we're also providing 100,000 for Men and Project. Building the Calgary Women's Emergency Shelter's successful counseling service program for men with anger management issues and abusive behaviors, I strongly believe that this digital platform will engage, educate, and empower so many men in Calgary, in Alberta, and hopefully nationwide. You should be very proud of your important contribution to the well-being of men who are facing challenges in their lives, especially during this difficult pandemic time. While the pandemic has created so many challenges for men, your approach through this digital presence will create easier access for valuable services. Men facing complex challenges will know where to go. They will also know how to find connection and other support, and through your platform, they can reach that faster. Simply knowing where to go to find help and creating less challenges for their journey of healing is something very important. With the help from community partners like you folks and people participating in today's celebration, Alberta's social services system can help make Albertans more resilient and to be able to overcome challenges now and in the future. I look forward to working together with all of you in empowering men and helping them get back on track. In closing, I want to thank everyone who has contributed to this project here, and thank you for demonstrating such dedication and support to valuable Albertans, men and boys. I look forward to getting to know you better in the future as we continue to work together to help men get support they need. Enjoy the rest of today's event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. And I want you to meet another great person, Jake Sticka. He's the Executive Director of Next Gen Men. Next Gen Men is a small but mighty Canadian nonprofit dedicated to change how the world sees, acts, and thinks about masculinity. And they are a key partner in the Men and Project. Jake couldn't be here live today, but he did send us a message to celebrate the launch of this project.
Hey folks, Jake Sticka, Executive Director and co-founder of Next Gen Men, a nonprofit working towards a future where boys and men feel less pain and cause less harm. I'm sorry that I'm not able to join you live today, but I'm so excited to be invited to contribute not only this video, but also as an advisor in the bringing together of Men and. It's such a needed service in a gap in and around engaging men and boys. At Next Gen Men, when we talk about a future where boys and men feel less pain and cause less harm, we're acknowledging that men are 3 out of 4 suicides, men have higher rates of substance abuse, incarceration, homelessness. They're the primary perpetrators of all forms of violence. And aside from gender-based violence, they are often the victims of violence at the hands of other men. And so those to us are issues that men are experiencing. And at Next Gen Men, we're really trying to get upstream and working with youth and in community and at workplaces as prevention and as cultural transformation to stop those things before they happen. But Men and fills a gap because there's men who are experiencing those things now, and Men and is there to support them, connect them with the services that they need to get through some difficult times and maybe engage with Next Gen Men down the road, or maybe not, but cause less harm to themselves, their peers, their loved ones, their community. And I think that that's a really important role for Men and to play, and I can't wait to see what it does for Alberta.
Well, you know, it's partly your work, Jake. So you're a good person and your group. Thanks so much for the work that you are doing. So you're saying to yourself, I know, but I want to know a bit more. What do you mean? What does this actually look like? And am I going to get to talk to the police chief? And what about Robbie Babbins Wagner? There's so much coming up. But first, here's a video to give you a sense of what's going to happen.
Growing up, I heard the phrase, boys don't cry, you got to be tough.
I always wanted to, kind of be more of the alpha thing.
My grandfather only lived to be 26, and he was a very violent man.
I started to feel like a bit of a broken individual, and didn't really have places to talk about it.
And that started catching up with me in my 30s.
And the relationship ended one day when I was at work. I just got home and everyone was gone.
I was getting like really, really short temper-wise.
So I had to figure something out.
So I started doing some research on what was out there, what resources were out there.
Taking that first step is hard. Like I started looking online for places. I called a few places.
Just talking to my counselor, kind of the more we talked, the more kind of tools I got under my belt.
Getting better at emotional regulation, and then it helped my relationships.
Yes, I'm a residential school survivor. I feel the importance of community in one's life, a sense of belonging.
I've learned that belief I had about masculinity was wrong.
Felt good to release that and let go of that pain, that sadness. I can't wait to see where I am a year from now.
Isn't this exciting? It's so good. So what does the actual website look like? I sat down with Dr. Jeff St. John, the CEO of the Blue Rock Project, co-founder and director of the Men and Chris Milton, the CEO of 323 Media. Now, Jeff led the research, design, strategy, implementation of the Men and Project, and Chris is the digital engagement partner. So the digital site is one part of a broader initiative aimed at engaging men for mental and relational well-being online and off. So I went to the two of them and they took me on a tour of the new site.
Thanks, Dave. So the MenEnd website is designed to be simple. It's structured with content in 4 key pillars. So within everything for men, when we're thinking about all the things that guys are thinking about and they need, breaking it down into 4 key columns made a lot of sense. The first being health, the second being relationships, the third being masculinity, and the fourth being community. Each of these different topics has different context depending on why you're looking into them. You know, health can be something that is somebody who really needs help with their mental health. It could also be someone who's looking to find some exercise tips and understand how to eat better. We understand how broad these topics can be. And so we wanted to break down as much as possible. And we're launching, we're just getting started. So we really want to have more depth within each of these categories. But within the columns, you're able to see that there's articles as well as definitions that are related to that topic, things that can really help you, things that can give you a better idea and have a really unbiased opinion when it comes to defining certain ideas, topics, and things that are floating around there that are just kind of hard for guys to figure out what exactly it means. The site's designed to have a depth of content so you can find definitions and articles based on everything related to men. We're getting started with the amount of content that we have, and this is being written by some experts in the field, as well as having different features of different people that you may be familiar with. As you take a look through the website, you'll find things as simple as navigate tips for the holidays and being able to get resources to help you with your goal setting for the New Year's. We have 3 key types of content on the website: definitions, articles and interviews, and resources. And I'd encourage you to get that first goal setting toolkit to help you plan your new year. The other big part of what we have for MenEnd is that this is a gateway for guys who need help.
So this is the most exciting to me part of the MenEnd thing, and the thing that really sets us apart is when you get to the Get Help page or to the phone number, you're connected to real life people who have deep expertise in all issues related to men's mental and relational well-being, and you're connected to a network of resources across the province. So across the site, on almost every page is the Take the MenEnd survey link, which gives opportunity for all the people visiting the site to pitch in their thoughts, comments, and ideas on what kind of content and what kind of format they want to have their content available to listen and watch and read across the site. With, in most instances, dedicated counselors that are ready to talk and book up face-to-face online appointments. And there's even an online chat, which will be coming on early in the new year.
There's 2 things that we need from you in the audience. The first is to go to the website and take the MenEnd survey. We're listening to you. We're listening to all the guys that are out there. We want to know what we can craft on MenEnd to better serve you. So take the survey and tell us what you're looking for. And the second is spread the word. Sharing a blog article, being able to go on our social media, give us a like, give us a follow, give us a comment. It goes way farther than you think. We're trying to get this message out there, and that's what we need from you.
So we have 3 tremendous people to help talk a little bit about men, the issues men face, and how this website and more is going to help us out. 3 great people. I'm going to start with you, Robbie. Robbie Babbins-Wagner led a remarkable career as a leader in the field of mental health. She's the CEO of the Calgary Counseling Center and has made the center a world leader in the use of practice-based evidence. She has extensive experience in counseling, supporting domestic abuse survivors, child welfare, health care. She's got all kinds of research and degrees and awards, and she's an incredibly smart person. She teaches at the U of C, and we're lucky to have her here. Hi, Robbie. I'm gonna give you loads of intros, and I'll let you get your mic on, and then I'm gonna pick on our Chief Constable Neufeld. Mark, it's good to have you here. He joined the Calgary Police Service in 2019 after decades of work in police work in Western Canada, and everything from criminal investigations, operational policy, the intelligence, professional standards, human resources. He's been director of investigations. He's done a lot. He's studied a lot. He's got a lot of awards and degrees, and I just want to get him on here. Mark, it's so good to have you here. Thanks for being with us, Chief.
Pleasure to be here, Dave.
And I finally want to bring up David Turner. David is an independent consultant with extensive experience working through complex social issues and building community capacity. So his experience includes initiatives in health, social services, management, policy development, community engagement. He has worked with both urban and First Nations social service programs. He's been a key member of the Indigenous Advisory Group, guiding the development of Men and over the past 18 months. And we've arrived, David. It's great to have you here. Thanks for joining us as well.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate it.
I'm so glad. So I'm going to pick on all of you, but to help set up, we put together a montage of some of the comments that we had or some of the interviews we've done that are a part of the Men and Project and part of the website. Have a look at this.
Oh, 3 years ago, I was a mess.
I remember one night, went to the emergency room. I just couldn't eat. I lost my appetite. I felt nauseous all the time.
A lot of post-traumatic stress that passed on even to my children.
And I didn't know at the time, I had no clue what I was really dealing with. I was seeing a doctor and we thought it might be an ulcer.
Relationships felt strained.
There was a lot of chaos.
I was more focused on my wife and making sure she was okay.
You're watching your partner who just went through a very traumatic labor suffer and be the primary caregiver for this baby and also having to take care of me.
Hurt my relationships with my ex-partner, hurt my relationship with my kids.
But it'll take generations to overcome these things.
Grew up with the men don't cry, and you gotta be strong and show no emotions.
My journey with masculinity is somewhat complex. I've never really felt like I fit the mold.
I didn't feel like I was being a good husband.
I've always been the one who's far more emotional, wants to talk about my feelings, and never really found healthy social context to do that.
You're either happy or you're angry. Everything gets thrown into kind of the angry bag.
At first, it was really hard to find the help and the resources, but I kept looking and I got some kind of help from friends.
You have to be careful who you talk to, release to the right people. You can't just talk to anybody.
During the pandemic with COVID and everything, a lot of our sessions were like over Zoom.
I did, like many, found myself online looking for answers, looking for solutions for why I felt broken.
A sense of belonging, a sense of touching the ground. This is what community is.
So, how are we ever going to talk about all this? But I feel so moved when I see that, because you realize how vulnerable men can be when they're finding a place to be. So let's go around the loop and talk to all of you first. I have a question for you. How's the world from your perspective, especially the world of men? Robbie, I'll pick on you first. You have extensive work as a counselor and running a counseling space. What's your sense of how men are doing out there now?
I think there are two perspectives on this. On the one hand, I think men are really taking steps to look after their mental health and their relationships. We've seen phenomenal growth in men seeking our services. That's up about 42% in the last 5 years. And what that translates to is over 17,000 men have sought services at Calgary Counseling Centre, either for mental health, for depression, anxiety, stress, or for their intimate relationships. And some of that work has been related to domestic violence.
David, for you, what is your perspective out there? How are men doing?
Well, I think with the opportunity to find an online resource where they can gain access to resources that are somewhat anonymous provides a safe pathway to getting well and for healing.
Chief, from the chair you sit in, what's your perspective?
My chair is an interesting one because nobody calls us when they're having a good day. So my sample might not be a positive sample, but I think men are struggling. I think everybody's had their life turned upside down, both personally and professionally. And so I think we've seen a lot of, initially in the pandemic, sort of probably maladaptive behavior and some strange coping skills and that type of thing. But for the most part, I think the silver lining might be that as the pandemic has stretched on, people are smart, and I think a lot of people are starting to adapt. And that might go back to what Robbie's saying about more people accessing services and looking at ways to take control of their lives that they may have felt they lost. And so I think that might be the silver lining, but I think folks are struggling.
And watching the video, and Robbie, you mentioned this when we were getting ready to do this conversation, and I wrote it down. You said that no one sets out to be abusive. No one sets out to be out of control. And that's true, isn't it?
It is. And that's the most poignant piece when I talk to men and work with men and watch men's groups. That's the piece that really hits my heart the most, is watching men, listening to men tell their stories and how they don't know how it escalated to them hurting their partner, because that's not what they really wanted. What they really want is for their pain to go away. They want to feel heard, and they want to feel connected to their partner. They just don't know what to do and how to do it.
One of the pillars in this is health, and that involves physical, all kinds. So talk a bit about that as far from your perspective, Robbie, in men and health and how that fits.
Men aren't as good as women are in general in looking after their health. Mm-hmm. I have a friend who's a physician who transitioned his practice a couple of years ago, mostly to work with men. And I said, so why'd you do that? And he said, because men don't come as often. He said, most of the time you can count on women to show up for their medical appointments, but when a man's not feeling well, when they're really frightened, they don't come. So I think we need to see a change, and I think we're seeing some evidence of this, where when men see a lump, or they're not feeling well, or they just can't get up to go to work in the morning, they're actually reaching out to others to get the resources that might help them take the next step. And this website is a great start, or a great contributor to that.
Because that's a scary, for me anyway, I would think that's scary. David, in the work you do with men, what about that first step to say, I think there's something wrong physically, I think there's something wrong mentally? How do we get men like me to reach out and to try to get that help?
Well, it starts with acknowledging that you're unhealthy. You're not doing well mentally, emotionally, and being cooped up with your partner for 24/7, every 7 days a week in confined spaces. Things escalate, and they escalate not over a period of time, but in a very short period of time. And where do you go for help? Can't turn to your partner. Let's look for something online. Let's look for something that's readily available right in front of you. Because a lot of people have their computers and are working from home, and these resources are readily available right there.
Well, and Chief, you said this, right? People don't tend to call you when everything's great, but I know you also have a passion and a lot of work in prevention. And this is trying to get men like me who maybe don't want to admit it or don't see it. It's important to have them get there before it's out of control.
Yeah, when Kim shared Men and there, I think, we embraced the idea of it right away. I mean, think about, the frontline police officer typically getting called once things have actually progressed, perhaps to a stage of crisis. And so a lot of times, it's not so bad that maybe there's not criminal charges or anything like that, but it's a bad situation. And I think every opportunity to interact with a man in a situation like that, where we could sort of signpost or refer them to some great resources that are, relevant and engaging and actually connected to supports like Men and is, I think, is a great opportunity for us to be able to do something meaningful at 3 a.m.
Well, because gosh knows I've done a lot of great things at 3 a.m. But if you look at the video we just watched, there's guys there talking. I have never been at a bar where men talk that way. I've never been at a party where men stand around in the kitchen and go, so how are your feelings? Are you having any, that just doesn't happen. So does that just mean, like Robbie, looking at us men, what's our deal? What is it about that makes that a hard thing to do?
I think men have been socialized historically to not share their feelings, to not share what they want, to not ask for help. And the good news is that we're seeing a change in that. My kids' generation are way more upfront about how they're feeling, how they're doing, and talking about it. They're doing better than my generation did, and my generation did better than our parents. So I think there's a lot of learning here about making sure that men in particular talk about what's happening for them, talk about their pain, find resources that will support them. because men generally keep it in, don't want to share it, don't want to be vulnerable. Men like to solve problems, and they don't see their problems often as worthy of solving. They'd rather do that for other folks around them.
I'd rather solve the problem of why Blythe doesn't know how to put the dishes in the dishwasher. To me, that seems like a real issue. But I do think of that sometimes. Like, I'll think, Dave, why are you having a conversation with the dishwasher? Is that really the biggest issue going on in your life right now? Because somehow it isn't. You know what, I would make this conversation amazing if we had somebody who's like in a power of real masculine strength, like somebody who runs a police force or something like that, who could talk about, oh wait, we do. Chief, do you ever talk about your feelings?
You know, I would say this. I've gotten better over the years. When I look now back to when I started in policing in the early 90s, I think about how far we've come when I compare it to today. I think, again, some of that maladaptive coping through, black humor and maybe alcohol, and we kept things in, but I think over time what we saw was a real shift in trying to provide supports, trying to get through to men about why it was important. And there were some hard things along the way. I mean, I can think of in my career, close people to me, probably at least 3 people, and all men, committed suicide. And these were individuals that I would never have guessed had any problems. They never let on. And then afterwards, after something devastating happened, you're, left trying to figure out, what happened here and what could I have done? And sometimes the answer is you couldn't have, because they were masters at hiding it. And so, like I say, when I compare it to today, the stigma is much, much less. That things aren't perfect, I wouldn't say, but they've come a long, long way.
Yeah. And yeah,
I can add to that. So historical and recent media promotion of 24/7 helplines and on assistance, especially in the spirit of reconciliation, has also reduced the stigma around asking for help. And it's not something that just happens on a day like the Bell Day or what have you. On National Indigenous Peoples Day, like, help is available for those of you who may be experiencing adverse impacts from hearing about residential schools. Like, and it's online. It's more acceptable today than it ever has been.
And do you think a piece of this is, and I say it's masculine, but let's face it, I think a lot of humans, no matter where you are, have this, where if I have a sore knee, well, I have a sore knee. I don't go to the doctor. I just will limp. That's what I do. And if I have a headache, well, then I just squint one eye a little bit and complain about it. But I don't actually go to a doctor and say I get headaches or I have a sore knee. So similarly, I think that if I'm stressed, I just go, well, life is stressful. Why would I need help for that? So, Robbie, you study this. Is that part of the issue, is not thinking you go to see someone?
Not thinking you'd go and figuring it'll just blow over, right? If I just wait a bit, it's going to disappear, or something else will come up to take its place. And we see that a lot in men. I think the pandemic, in many respects, and some of you may disagree with me, has been a gift, because I think it actually created an opportunity in particular for men, but women also, to seek counseling, to seek help, to connect with others, because the quickness of the isolation that we experienced last March and not knowing what to do really pushed people, I think, who were already struggling with mental health to reach out and seek help. And the awareness of services, there was all kinds of messaging about services being available, both online and some in person. Mm-hmm. But online has been a huge gift, because we can reach people anywhere in the province.
Mm-hmm. And I actually like it. I've talked to people online like this, and it's surprisingly, as much as we all say, if I have to do one more Zoom, it actually does work, doesn't it?
It sure does.
Yeah. Talk a bit about we talked about health. I want to talk relationships and community a little bit. So relationships, there's a couple of ways to look at this one. And certainly the website does a lot more than I will, but there's things like I'm stuck with somebody 24 hours a day, as we heard, that can be hard, or I'm not with somebody and that's hard. There's just a lot of relationship issues. Robbie, what are you finding there?
I think that these last 20 months have been challenging for everybody in a variety of ways. I said, but being together with your partner 24/7, if you have a small house, if you don't have choices about what to do, really push people to the limits. And these are not normal limits. These are extraordinary limits. So I think people have looked for outlets, being outdoors. I know I live near a park. I can't believe the number of people that are outside walking in the park, singles, couples, families. We didn't see that before the pandemic. The other thing about couples for me, and I once had a prof many years ago who said something which I originally thought was weird. And then, being married and having kids, you realize that some of this is true. And that is that marriage and relationships, he said, we're a people growing machine, because there's no other part of our life where we spend so much time with somebody else and are challenged to find ways to compromise, find solutions, and look at how we want to move forward. And a lot of the folks we work with get stuck in one of those parts of that. So they either are afraid to find solutions, they're afraid to move forward, they're afraid to talk about the things that are troubling them. And, that kind of piece keeps us very busy at Calgary Council Centre.
David, in your experience, where are the crunches when it comes to relationships for the people you see?
Well, for Indigenous communities, and that's where I'm speaking from my lens, is we, community involvement or engagement and working together. Traditionally, we respect one another. We treat each other with respect. We treat each other with, it's a sacred relationship. It's not just a marriage. It's something that we're here to honor. It's something we need to communicate openly, honestly with one another. And that's not always easy, but when it's grounded in principles like honesty, directness, respect, and humility, it does have a tendency to work out a lot easier.
You mentioned those qualities. I tend to work more in the say something dumb, avoid the real issue, and then leave. And I'm assuming those aren't exactly the ones you're talking about, are they, David? But it is like, I hear you say that, and it's the same thing. Like if let's say the chief and I were in a room, we would have a lot to talk about, but I don't know how quickly into that conversation, chief, I'd say, so how are you really doing? Or you'd say to me, how are you really doing? But really, those are part of the conversations we need to have, aren't they?
They are. And, it's funny you say that, because I'm hearing that more than ever. And maybe it goes back to what Robbie was saying about, the positive side of the pandemic and the fact that we've been forced with the extra time that we've had to be more introspective and to think about these things. And I had a colleague come up this morning and just pop his head into my office and say, hey, let's go for a coffee. And that was exactly what he was saying downstairs. Like, how are you doing? As we were standing down there. And I was struck by the fact that, to your point, that's not always the conversations we had. But I think in the environment, everybody's realizing that it's a difficult environment for all of us. And I think we have, in some ways, some people maybe have become less compassionate, and we see that. And then others have become more compassionate. And so I like to look at both sides of it, because I like to try to remain somewhat optimistic in all of it. But I'm actually struck by the depth of some of the conversations we are having.
And isn't reminders, like for me, just sitting here, I'm like, you know what? Because all of us have this state of stress. We're all just a bit more stressed. I'm like, if my kids have one more day off school, I'm going to lose my mind, or whatever, the stress that's constantly there. And unless somebody reminds me, like this conversation, it's like, wait a minute, just be more patient, because it's easy to forget that we're all feeling stress. Robbie, don't you think? Or anyone?
I do. And also the way women relate to these issues are different. So women get into a room together. If Kim and I are getting together, it's very easy for us to say, how you doing? And we're actually going to talk about how we're doing. And we'll share the stresses and what we're worried about and those kinds of things. That doesn't happen with men. And one of the things I started doing when my kids were young, especially I have boys, is doing physical things with them. And what I mean by that is if I was really concerned about their mental health or their well-being or problems in school, I would take them outside and I'd shoot hoops with them. Or I'd go for a walk with them, or I'd ask me to join me on a trip to the grocery store. And I found if we were doing something, men would be more willing to talk, to share what's going on. And it was because it was almost impossible to do that sitting in the house or sitting at the kitchen table, which is typically what women would do. So learning how to kind of engage men and work with men. And I think that was kind of some of the beginning steps of working some of my interest or in working with men in a more specific and focused way.
Hard. Because, you know, I just hearing you say that, that's exactly how John and I, my son John is 10. And if we're ever to have like a real conversation, it's always after or during doing something. When I say, how you doing? Let's sit down and see how you're doing. I don't get anything. But if we're like out playing, then that's when something will happen.
Yeah.
Okay, Robbie, watch this. I'm going to try it. Ready? David, how you doing?
I'm doing really well. I'm kind of tired this morning, but I'm doing really well. And thanks for asking, David. How are you doing? Really?
See, that's the danger. I go and ask you, and I think, oh, please, he's going to ask me, and then I'm good. I am worried about the pandemic. More, I feel the stress of all of the vax fighting, and I just feel the stress of family members that I don't agree with, and I think, is everyone just going to hate each other? So I feel that stress, but I don't want to have an argument about. I'm okay. Man, this is hard. Robbie, I'm going to the chief now. Chief, or I'm not, Mark. How you doing?
No, I'm doing pretty good. I, for the most part, there's so many things. Like, I think I've spent many hours on the professional side of things, to the exclusion of my responsibilities at home. At least I feel that way many times. And so, and I think this is a man thing, Dave. I think at times, you realize that you may be overinvested in one area and you can't necessarily help it. But I start to feel like I'm letting people down in another area. And so, I'm lucky I have a partner who's open and actually really good at engaging me and encouraging me about these things. But that's how you can get down a road like that, right? Where you can start to feel like, man, I don't think I'm delivering and I don't think I'm doing what I need to do, what's important to me. And pretty soon, I think you can get down to a place where you're down on yourself and just generally get down. And I think that's, for me, that's something I have to watch times like this for sure.
You ever been, and I'm sure you've all been in those rooms as an interviewer, I've been in a space where, and it doesn't happen often, if a guy starts to cry or if a guy gets really angry, even in like you're at a cocktail party and somebody just gets mad, everything quiets down, because it's like, that's the first time in forever I've heard somebody be really, this is what I'm dealing with right now. I want to talk a bit about, because one of the pillars is masculinity. So Chief, your world is literally what people think masculinity is, right? I mean, you're a kid, I want to grow up, I want to be a police, and then I want to be the police chief. So you have the title of the most masculine job in our city. And clearly that sort of title comes with issues. Why do you think, first of all, that this group would say masculinity needs to be a pillar? And what are your thoughts around that?
I think, it's probably a bit of a coping mechanism for people in, that work in the police world. I think there are many things coming at people, especially now, but it always has been. But I can tell you, I'm struck in the mornings 2 times a day. We get sort of briefing notes about the things that are going on in the city. And I see some crazy things going on that members are dealing with. And so I think, we are still a male-dominated culture. I think the numbers of women in the organization are rising, but still not to the point that they would be, 50-50 like we have in the community. So we're still male-dominated. And I think some of it is a coping mechanism and some of it is what people bring in because of the way that they've been socialized, as Robbie referred previously. I think there's a lot of kind of thoughts about what you're supposed to be like, and what traits you're supposed to be. I mean, if I was to ask you right now, picture a police officer in your mind. A lot of people, when you do that exercise with them, they think about white, male, strong, fit, all of these things. And so it's about tearing down some of those stereotypes and recognizing that masculinity does not need to be toxic masculinity. Masculinity is good, but like everything else, too much can be too much.
In your world, David, how do you handle people's conception around and understanding of masculinity?
Well, the family men that I'm that I work with and that I know predominantly come from a traditional background, and they practice a traditional way of life, which isn't something that is promoted or talked a lot about. When you're living a traditional way of life, there are outlets, there are alternatives, there are resources that you can access that help you deal with, accepting everybody for where they're at. What we do, and it goes back to what Robbie was talking about, going out and getting rocks for a sweat, firewood for a sweat, being active, physically active and doing things together enables you to get rid of that energy or be in a different environment as you're helping each other to help the family. And it's the reason why we're doing it is for everybody's healing, for everybody's well-being, emotional, mental, spiritual, and physical well-being. And that's what we practice. That's what I've been practicing in my life. And those are the type of men that I associate with. And that does help. And it is different.
I could talk about these things all day, but I want to go around one more time and ask one simple question, and that is, what gives you hope? So I'll start with you, Robbie, and then David, and then the Chief. But I'd just like you to think about, given this, this website gives me hope, but however that leads you, how does that question lead you? Robbie, starting with you, what gives you hope?
There are actually two things that give me hope. One is the number of men that are seeking services and they're coming on their own. So one of our sweet spots in our work is working with men who've either hurt their partners or who may have done something the night before and said, oh my God, I realized I really could have hurt her, and they're seeking help quickly. And people don't wait at Calgary Counseling Center. We don't have a wait list, so people are seen very quickly. The other piece that gives me hope is watching my oldest son, who's been married for a while, is a father now, and I see a different view of masculinity in him, the way he approaches his relationships, the way he talks about what's happening for himself, the way he's parenting his son, than I think my generation and my parents' generation did. And that gives me hope.
So good. David, what gives you hope?
Well, there have been very few Indigenous specific services readily available for Indigenous men to seek help. And by participating and helping create this medium gives me hope that Indigenous men will now have a pathway to gain help, services to sustain and get healthy.
Chief, what gives you hope?
I see change happening, Dave. And like Robbie said, I see the generations, and year by year, you see a different type of interaction between fathers and parents generally and their sons. And I think that, even what we're talking about here, access to resources like Men and that is online and available to people. I think people are looking for resources. And when I think beyond, we're blessed in the city of Calgary and in the larger centers to have lots of access to resources and supports, that you think that this is available to folks in more rural and remote areas as well, where traditionally those resources weren't necessarily available. And I guess the next piece for me is that I do think people care. We've talked about situations where even when the police have to come and intervene, and you do get, generally it's men that are the perpetrators, but I do sense that people care and want to make change. And now, as I say, the resources are there in ways that they haven't been previously. And that gives me hope. So for me, I guess it would be those couple of things.
So great. Well, thanks the three of you for being part of the conversation. I think of my son is 10. And as those of you that have kids know, that's the perfect age where they still think I'm pretty smart. And it's exciting, though. I think we just all need to be 10, because John just wants to learn. If I say, let's learn how to drive a stick shift right now, it's magic. Anything he gets to try, he's excited. And that's what I wanted. This site to me is that. It's saying, remember when you were 10 and you were just open and willing to learn. That's where we want all of us to get to. So thank you very much, Robbie. I appreciate you being here. Thanks, Mark, for being here as well, and David, and also everybody at the Calgary Women's Emergency Shelter, everybody at the Calgary Counseling Center, and all the other groups that got together to say this matters for me, for other men. It's all so important. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.